If I asked you to picture someone with an extremely high IQ, you'd probably say something like lab coat, quiet confidence, maybe glasses for good measure. Maybe they speak in perfectly formed sentences and never second guess themselves. The kind of person who walks into a room and everybody just knows. And the uncomfortable truth is that image is almost entirely wrong. The people who score in the top fraction of a percent on cognitive testing don't walk around feeling like geniuses. Most of them spend an embarrassing amount of time convinced they're frauds. They stay up until 3 a.m. not because they're working on something brilliant. Sometimes they're just awake, catastrophically, uselessly awake, thinking about something they said in 2009. They talk to themselves. They forget where they put things constantly. And when you actually study what their psychology looks like up close, it's a lot more chaotic and a lot more human than anyone cares to admit. So if any of this is already sounding somewhat familiar, great. Let's dive into the 7 weird habits that they might possess, and let me know if any stick out for you. 1. The single most consistent pattern in people with very high IQs is that they doubt themselves more than almost anyone around them. They're not fishing for reassurance. Genuinely, structurally, they believe they are less capable than they are. Research on competence and self-assessment consistently shows that higher performers tend to underestimate their relative standing, while lower performers overestimate theirs. And one compelling explanation is that the more deeply someone understands a domain, the more clearly they can see its full complexity, and therefore all the ways they're still falling short. The person who barely understands something tends to feel surprisingly confident. The person who understands it deeply sees the gaps in what they don't know yet. What this produces in high IQ individuals is a kind of permanent low-level anxiety that they're somehow getting away with something, that people around them have overestimated them, that eventually someone's going to figure it out. And the smarter they are, the more elaborate the internal case they can build against themselves. Because that same cognitive machinery that makes them excellent at complex reasoning, it's equally great at constructing reasons why they're not good enough. It's almost funny when you step back. The person most qualified to be in the room is often the one most convinced they shouldn't be there. 2. High IQ individuals are disproportionately likely to be night owls, and this isn't a lifestyle preference, it appears to be neurological. Research by Kanazawa and Perina published in Personality and Individual Differences found that people with higher measured intelligence consistently went to bed later and woke up later than their lower IQ counterparts, even after controlling for job schedules and social obligations. The researchers framed it through an evolutionary lens, the capacity to override your circadian rhythm for abstract, self-chosen reasons like reading, thinking, and creating is a relatively recent human behavior, and it appears to show up more in people with higher general intelligence. What this means in practice is that a lot of very smart people are chronically sleep deprived, slightly dysregulated, and operating in a world that was built around a morning schedule they will never naturally fit into, which does often come across as lazy, but their hardware just ticks differently. 3. They talk to themselves, out loud, more than they'd probably admit at a dinner party. And this one actually has solid research behind it. Private speech, the technical term for self-directed verbal thought, is well documented as a tool for cognitive self-regulation and executive function. Saying something out loud genuinely helps the brain process it differently than just thinking it. What we observe in many high IQ individuals, though this is more of a reported pattern than a tightly controlled finding, is a strong tendency to use language as a tool for thinking, not just communicating. When there's nobody to talk to, the conversation still has utility, so they have it anyway. The social side effect of this is that they sometimes get caught doing it in a grocery store or a parking garage, and have to very quickly pretend they were on the phone. 4. This one isn't contemplated enough, but people with very high IQs are significantly more prone to anxiety and rumination than the general population. Penny and Bott published research showing a genuine link between high verbal intelligence and elevated worry, the hypothesis being that the same capacity for predictive thinking that makes someone analytically gifted also makes them extremely good at imagining everything that could go wrong. Your brain is, among other things, a threat detection machine, so a more powerful brain doesn't necessarily mean a calmer one. Sometimes it means a faster, more thorough threat detector, one that can generate disaster scenarios you hadn't even considered yet at remarkable speed. High IQ individuals tend to be anxious because their brains are running simulations constantly, and some of those simulations can be terrifying. 5. They forget things, mundane, ordinary, embarrassing things, like where they put their keys, whether they replied to that text, or maybe the name of someone they've met 4 times. This drives the people around them insane. It also drives them insane. Now, this one is more of an observed pattern than a hard research finding, so take it as such. But the explanation that makes the most sense cognitively is prioritization. A mind heavily invested in complex, abstract thinking appears to allocate less attention to low-stakes, repetitive information. The keys always end up somewhere, so something else felt more urgent. This doesn't make it less frustrating, but it does explain why someone who can mentally model a 15-step problem sometimes cannot remember if they turned the stove off. 6. They tend to have a broader and more expressive vocabulary, including the parts of it that would make your grandmother cover her ears. A study by J&J published in Language Sciences found that people who are comfortable using taboo language actually score higher on verbal intelligence tests, not lower. So the people cursing the most aren't doing it because they've run out of better words. Not always, but occasionally they're doing it because they understand language well enough to know exactly which word fits the moment, and perhaps that word happens to be a 4-letter one. To them, words are tools, and a good craftsman uses whatever tool gets the job done, right? And finally, number 7, sensory overload. People with very high IQs are disproportionately likely to experience the world as too loud, too bright, just too much. And this isn't hypersensitivity as a character flaw. Research has found associations with high cognitive ability and heightened sensory processing sensitivity, meaning the brain that takes in more information analytically may also, quite literally, take in more sensory input than average. Crowded restaurants become genuinely overwhelming in a way they aren't for other people. Certain textures, sounds, or lighting conditions register as intrusive rather than background. The same bandwidth that processes complexity deeply also processes the environment deeply, and the environment is a lot. This is one reason why many high IQ individuals strongly prefer controlled, quiet, low stimulation spaces to work, not as a personality quirk, but because their nervous systems are operating under a heavier load than most people around them realize. What all of this adds up to is a picture that looks less like a superhero and more like a person who is quietly exhausted by their own mind, brilliant in ways that are real and sometimes remarkable, and also anxious, self-doubting, scattered, nocturnal, occasionally talking to themselves in a parking garage, and genuinely startled by how loud that one restaurant was. If you recognize yourself in this, in the doubt, the 3 a.m. wakefulness, the emotional weight of a brain that won't stop running, that recognition matters. Not because intelligence makes suffering more valid, but because a lot of people who carry this particular profile spend their whole lives being told they have every advantage, wondering why it still feels so hard. Now you know why. If you're interested in exploring some of my explanations further, I've put together a collection of books that dive deeper into psychology, human behavior, and independent thinking. You can find the full list on my bookshop page through the link in the description and pinned comment. And if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss future uploads.